Hello, and thanks for watching the Friends of the Farm lecture series. Each session is designed to deliver a small and in depth dose of cannabis education. I'm Candace Hawes, and I want to thank all of our viewers and customers from the pharmacy, the pottery, and the Natural Healing Center, as well as all of our friends and viewers joining us from all over the world. In this session, we're going to discuss how cannabis products are formulated to activate the entourage effect. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Jeffrey Raber, PhD. I've known Dr. Raber for more than a dozen years. He's dedicated to helping consumers and those in the industry to better understanding cannabis and its constituents to help make better products. Dr. Raber received his BS in biochemistry from Lebanon College in Pennsylvania. He subsequently received a PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Southern California with an emphasis in developing synthetic methodologies useful in pharmaceutical drug discovery and manufacturing efforts. Dr. Raber entered the cannabis industry in 2010 and published 6 peer-reviewed articles on the cannabis topics. Dr. Raber has been invited to lecture about cannabis all around the world and holds multiple patents on cannabis-based technologies, particularly pertaining to terpenes, and is often sought out by his peers to present on comments, and is recognized as one of the industry's scientific thought leaders. I'm very excited to have him as one of my friends and longtime cannabis industry colleagues. Dr. Raber is our guest speaker today and has prepared a wonderful and insightful presentation that I'm looking forward to hear. Yeah.
Thanks, Candace.
Sorry, let's get this back to the first slide here. Yeah, so, the reason that cannabis works within our own system is because we have an endocannabinoid system and, all the cannabinoids, working together and terpenes and flavonoids and all that, produces like an entourage effect. And I try to explain this to the patients that come in and when I speak to groups and, it's something that, is very complex. And so that's why I invited you to come and talk to our consumers and to our viewers today. And so I'm really excited about all the slides that you've put together. I had a chance to review it. And so I'm really excited about this presentation today.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. As you said, it's not a simple topic,
No.
so we'll try to do our best to simplify it as much as possible. And I hope everyone enjoys it. And I see people from around the world. Looks like New Zealand, Hawaii, and everywhere else. So welcome to everybody, and thank you for tuning in. It's been a pretty interesting road. I mean, knowing you for over 12 years, that tells you how long we've been out here. Sometimes it feels longer, but it's been interesting, right? I think what we've learned, what we've come to think we understand somewhat today, and where we started. I think when we first started, everyone talked about only THC, and there were very few that mentioned CBD as well. Mm-hmm. So at least we broadened that conversation to many other molecular constituents. Now starting to tease out and understand a little bit more what the players actually do and how they work together. I think we have a little bit more, a lot more work to actually do in that respects. But I'm glad to see, we're all here talking about this type of topic, and hopefully conversations like this will start to bring to the forefront of everyone's mind that it's more than just one molecule or another from this plant that's actually causing a lot of the benefits and physiological impacts that we feel. So, a little bit about me. Thank you for the nice introduction. I won't belabor the point. I'm a chemist, right? So I like molecules. I like how they interact with the body. I've worked on drug discovery, drug development, ways of making things interact with the body. And, I wanted to kind of ask 2 questions to kick it off. And the first one is, have you heard of the entourage effect in cannabis? Well, that's the main topic today. And I'm just kind of a little bit curious, what people might think about that one. And it'll help me kind of gauge a little bit, what the audience, at least this audience for now, kind of understands about that. So it looks like, we got a couple of respondents, and so far, a lot of people, everyone that's answered so far anyway, is saying that they have heard of the entourage effect with cannabis, which is encouraging. I think it's been a more popularized word. I think more folks have started to mention it. The better question would be like, do we all think we understand it and know what it means? Yeah, that might be a different one.
Yeah.
We might get different answers that way, but we asked yes or no questions, so we'll keep it simple for now. But we've had 11 respondents, and everybody said they've heard of it, so that's good. Hopefully not just from this webinar. So the second question that I was kind of curious about, maybe we could close that one and go to the next one, was, have you heard of Delta 8 THC or any other hemp-derived cannabinoid, not necessarily CBD, but ones that may be, um, kind of coming from different routes, or perhaps synthesized, or even maybe a biosynthesis or other stuff that says, hey, these are found in hemp, but maybe not coming from a direct extraction in hemp. And I know, like, over recent years, Delta 8 has certainly risen in popularity considerably. Some of the facts that I've heard are, they think well more than half of the hemp is being converted to Delta 8 THC. I think we thought that may have happened in 2018. We wrote a white paper about Delta 8 THC, and a lot of folks were like, we don't understand what you chemists are talking about. And we said, we think we're going to see more and more of this. And I'll highlight a little bit of that later in some of the slides. So, and 11 people said yes, they have heard of that, and 2 said no. So there are some people that are, these are going to be new topics, which is great. And I think, we've heard of Delta 8, many have, but what is it doing? What might it be doing? How different might it be? And I'll try and touch on a little of that too. So, what are some of the components of cannabis? I like to think of it as medical cannabis, but certainly it's any and all cannabis. It's causing a physiological effect. The latest number I've heard now, we've got cannabinoids that are found in and on the plant. There are over 230 of them, or approximately 230. I think it was 228, was what Professor Lemir Hanoush from Israel had mentioned recently, earlier this year at a conference I was at. So I think that's a pretty accurate number. That's a lot more than we first had thought were there. And again, kind of highlights it's not one or two kind of cannabinoids that most of us had talked about to begin with. And there are some of them that are listed here. So I think there's more prevalent in today's world. We see THC, CBD. A lot of folks have probably heard of CBN. We asked about Delta 8 THC. There are other acidic, precursors to those like THCA, CBDA. And then we have CBG, CBGA, and things like that are starting to become more prevalent, right? Hemp farmers have started to diversify their cultivation efforts. We're starting to see different cultivars. The varins like THCV are starting to show up as well. CBDV, I've heard of some patients utilizing. So we're starting to get to many more, of the plant's components being available in a somewhat commercial sense, at least through the dispensaries or even online systems. There are the hemp-derived cannabinoids that I've listed there, like Delta 8 THC. We've got Delta 10, Delta 11, HHC, and even some other novel ones like THCP, JDO, you name it. It's becoming a bit of alphabet soup. So as right, as chemists, we are pretty comfortable with acronyms or lettered codes instead of saying these really long, complex scientific names that most of us can't even pronounce well either. We'll say 3 or 4 letters to kind of abbreviate that. So it's maybe a little bit more comfortable for some of us that have been molecule jockeys for a while. You just put the letters there and it makes sense. And some of them denote different things, like the OAC, I'll talk about, it means acetate. So that's, I think the challenge with that is it's going to very rapidly expand. I mean, we wouldn't have put these on a slide maybe a year ago. And now they're here, they're out in the marketplace, they're kind of more prevalent. So I think, we should kind of know, what are we talking about in some respects, and what are we, wanting to look for or talk about or understand better before we'd actually consume some of that. And the other piece, there are a lot of other molecules in cannabis. I think it's up over like 1,200 different molecules, but terpenes and terpenoids, these are building blocks of isoprene, are built up by the plant. The plant uses them to kind of signal many different things. Those are pretty prevalent. And I think most people have heard the word terpene or terpenoid nowadays. Whether we're familiar with it, which ones are our favorites, I think there's still a lot of education and experience and exploration to have in that regard. But I know that that's been around for a little while. And I'll talk more in depth about those later here too. So why do we talk about these, right? I think that's kind of the big piece, is we know one molecule is not as effective as many others. So the more that we have it looking like the plant, when we have an extract, a formulated product, or some sort of derivation that's not just sitting on the plant material, the broader the therapeutic utility and therapeutic window is for that. So we wouldn't talk about any of these things if one molecule was great. We'd have single molecule THC, which is Marinol. That's a FDA approved pharmaceutical product. We have other ones that are similar to that. We have CBD now as Epidiolex. A lot of folks have found, those things are not helpful. They're not as useful as the whole plant or using all the molecules found in the plant. So that's where this whole idea of what is the entourage effect? How can I utilize many more molecules to kind of interact with the body system in a broader fashion? And a decent analogy that I had heard once was, think of one molecule as like someone pounding one key on a piano, but when you talk about whole plant or more of the plant molecules, you're playing all the keys on the piano.
Mhm.
So it's much more pleasing to the ear, right? We get many more opportunities for beautiful, wonderful songs, and things that we can hear in that respects. And that's a little bit more of like what we're trying to do with physiological effect and feel. So you get, olfactory, sensory perceptions, you get much different physiological modulation and impacts that may help you go from dis-ease to ease. The question is, how can I utilize these tools to move my body into a place that feels better, as opposed to, the way it might feel now, which is not, pleasant, or is certainly an ailment. How can I move away from that into a much more pleasant and effectful spot? And what we're mostly talking about is the endocannabinoid system. At least that's what we think we're talking about today. We're not sure. They may have activities in other named systems, but the body never named these things. We did, right? So humans have said, let's call it these labels. Let's put, receptor names up there. I always found it entertaining. It was, CB1, CB2, cannabinoid receptor 1, cannabinoid receptor 2, but they kind of stopped naming them 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even though there are other ones, now working within that system. Vincenzo Di Marzo is the big scientist in Italy that has, done a lot of work on mapping the system. And he used to joke, I've got one slide, now I've got two. I wonder if I'll need three. How many, slides might I need when I'm finally done here to actually describe the entire system? It's a very complex system of balance. So we're trying to bring the body to homeostasis, trying to bring it back into a system of balance. And, if I look at one of these receptors and I look at one of these targets, how might that act? Well, fatty acid amide hydrolase, there have been folks that have tried to make inhibitors for that, saying, hey, if I can stop that, that will degrade anandamide, the body's endocannabinoid. That will then, if I can slow that down, do I then build up the levels of anandamide? And might I be able to say the endocannabinoid tone is improved and I could have therapeutic utility? What we know is if you start to really lock up these systems, it can be catastrophic. So in some trials of those types of molecules, they had very significant adverse events. And it was, horrific for the folks that were actually doing it. So if you impact the system too strongly at only one point, and we've asked, probably heard stories of seeing spice in K2 and synthetic cannabinoids doing that as well. It is deleterious to us. We kind of lock up our, a very key regulatory system within the body, and it can cause catastrophic failure for some folks. So I think the goal and what cannabis offers is to try and say, well, multiple points of balance. How can I kind of tickle those things without really hitting them very, strongly and trying to lock it all the way up? And how can I, usher in a host of molecules at once, such that the body can intelligently select and balance and kind of come back to a better place, as opposed to one molecule, interacting with one receptor. CBD, I think a lot of folks have heard of that. It's interesting. You say, oh, CBD interacts with this receptor here. Well, if you read a review about CBD, it interacts with 65 different receptors. So when we first started learning about it, we learned about it with one receptor. We said, hey, it does this. But as you study it longer, you might, start looking at different receptors, and you start to find out that interacts with very many different receptors in different ways. So the idea that one thing goes into our body and does only one activity, that's definitely not correct, right? It can do all of these things all at once. It's why we have effective medicines, but also side effects from some of those medicines. Offering all of these molecules at once seems to be a better way of keeping the dose down, having them work together, which is greater for lack of side effects. So improving efficacy and leading to more opportunity to balance our body in different ways. And this is a little snip from Vincenzo Di Marzo's work, a little bit of like what the endocannabinoid system might look like. it is again about balance. How do I bring the system to balance? And I can have too little cannabinoids and I can have a deficiency syndrome where introduction of exogenous cannabinoids from cannabis and other sources may be very helpful and useful. But I can also overdo that. Right. So if I add too much of cannabinoids to my body, we're seeing some more folks that have been, it's more plentiful. We've got to watch our dose and be very responsible. Folks that have taken too much for too long a period, it ends up, pushing the system the other way. Um, and that is leading to what we call cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So that's a pretty, doesn't sound like a very fun condition. People are vomiting uncontrollably. They need kind of like a hot shower or some other things to try and calm it down. You have to reduce the cannabinoids, which can take a significantly long period of time till the body metabolizes all of them. And then you have to let your system come back to balance. So some folks, can't touch much of cannabinoids at all after they've gotten to that place. So it's definitely a word of caution. There can be too much of a good thing. Even water, you can have too much of that.
Yeah.
That can be a problem. So you got to make sure to watch your amounts, watch your dose, watch your consumption rates, make sure it's not negatively impacting you in any way. And make sure that, you're not watching your usage rates go up to a place where it may be harmful. Talk to a doctor, talk to your dispensary staff, talk to folks about it. And just kind of monitor yourself. Your family and friends will tell you, like, hey, there's been a lot more use now. Be aware that that's probably a bad sign, and you want to make sure you don't get all the way to the emesis type of hyperemesis types of syndromes. So the entourage effect, which brings us here today, was first coined by Raphael Mechoulam, who recently, unfortunately, passed away. So after 90 plus years out here on the planet, had done an immense amount of work, a big pioneer in cannabinoids. Fully elucidated the structure of THC. Done a lot of work on CBD and a lot of things within the endocannabinoid system. So he and Shabbat, coined the term to describe what you see here. Is it was really only with endocannabinoids, right? So it didn't mean anything to the folks with cannabis plants and all of us running around out here. And their clip from their paper is right there, and the links to the publications are there. Most of them are pretty freely available, at least the abstracts and stuff too. Dr. Ethan Rousseau comes along, and I believe it was 2011, and he kind of said, hey, I think we can extend the use of this term to include terpenes and other molecules from the plant. So if I'm looking to the cannabis plant to impact our physiological effects, they will also interact and impact things with this entourage effect. Whole plant medicines utilizing more molecules from the plant will interact in a similar fashion to what Mechoulam described first with the endocannabinoids, where 1 + 1 is greater than 2. So the activity that I'm seeing with these receptors, and the activity pronounced in the body, I'm starting to notice more activity than I would if it was one molecule by itself. So if I had 10 milligrams of THC, the impact of 10 milligrams of THC plus some terpenes or plus another cannabinoid is going to be felt differently. I'm going to have much more, impact to the body. So maybe I can get away with 7, 6, even 5 milligrams of THC and these other plant components to elicit that same physiological response. I also might broaden the therapeutic window where I can start to impact many other diseases or disease states or types of physiological conditions that I could bring back to balance when I utilize more molecules and more of these tools together. Um, so, considering terpenes, I think what do we want to think about when it's with terpenes? Well, it took, the academics quite a while to kind of catch up and finally publish. And Levine recently published in 2021 how they really found some of the terpenes were actually impacting the cannabinoid systems. They had cannabinomimetic properties. They were looking to kind of act like cannabinoids. And again, this is some of the first ones. So they were looking at certain receptors with certain terpenes. The picture is probably much more broad than we would like to think, right? And we're going to have to kind of bite size chew down this whole elephant to kind of make full sense of it. So this is, a little bit of the early signs, and this is, tip of the iceberg type of thing. but we now have solid concrete evidence that terpenes can interplay with this system and they can impact how cannabinoids, are interacting with the body. I think most of us that have consumed cannabis would tell you, yeah, we definitely know that's true. That's why we've seen different effects from different products, different, cultivars, different concentrates. We physiologically have felt it, and now the scientists, in the research laboratories are actually starting to fully elucidate and understand a little bit more of exactly how that's happening. And more recently, it was just earlier this year, Roz and his fellow cohorts have recently discovered, yeah, these terpenes are really impacting THC and its overall dose and effect. So they really elucidated that, hey, when I have certain terpenes and at the amounts that we see, kind of modeled after the plant, if they look like they were made, nature kind of guided us here, and it may have gotten there after many many years of evolution, right? So long periods of time have led it to this position. It's probably solved for that problem, so that the cannabis plant sticks around and we can benefit from it. And he's started to elucidate, hey, these are the right receptors are impacted by the right ratios, and we can see how different terpenes can kind of modulate the cannabinoid effects up and down. So, there's another piece that kind of tells us, hey, these terpenes are certainly exceptionally important in use with cannabinoids, and they can have function within the endocannabinoid system. Beta caryophyllene was kind of known to have CB2 receptor activity. I think that's been known for a little while, but we're now starting to see. Let's look at bigger picture, like systems biology, bigger types of perspectives, more molecules at once, and start to try and tease out a little bit more of how this whole thing might be playing together. So what you know what I'd like to say, like, what is the entourage effect? Well, you can have a cannabinoid plus a cannabinoid. You can have a cannabinoid plus a terpene. You can have a cannabinoid plus many terpenes. You can have cannabinoid, terpene, terpenes, and you can start to see the math just kind of go pretty wild and crazy, right? If there's 200 plus options of cannabinoids, that's a lot of possibilities. If there's 150 terpenes, it's a lot more. And if all these have different amounts and different ratios, like, it's a lot, right? It's just large numbers of zeros worth of possible combinations. So great potential utility, but the double edge of that sword is, could I be lost in this forest forever and never find, the flower that I wanted? Could I, how do I get to the right physiological place for myself or for, what I'm looking for, such that I can get the desired response from that. So it's very exciting that we have this opportunity and this type of utility, but I think only through product standardization, through product consistency that is manufactured in really good means, and really good analytical chemistry saying, let's look at these things the right way and understand these compositions, might we really be able to start to take the next steps of saying, here's a great medicine for these types of people. We also have to consider ingestion routes of administration, which is another layer of complexity. We don't have enough molecules, right? We've got to like complexity on top of that by how am I going to consume it? Inhale it, topically, orally. It just kind of keeps spiraling on itself there and expanding on itself. So in terms of terpenes, we were the first commercial lab to kind of look for terpenes back in 2011. And we said, let's just put them on the labels. Let's get it out there. Everyone doesn't want to pay for anything because they don't, especially if they don't understand there's any utility or value to it. But we were convinced, and we said, hey, look, let's get these on the label. We'll start looking for some. We started with around 35 different terpenes that we look for. Our new methods in-house, we don't do commercial or compliance testing. We do research testing, mostly, for ourselves or from other development projects. We now have an analytical run that looks at over 250 components in the plant. So we, can dive deeply. We can investigate what's unique about this compared to some other ones. What's here that may, be in larger amounts comparatively. And we've kind of, continued to work diligently on evolving our analytical efforts, and therefore our understanding of which ones may be present and when and in which products. So it started to come into pretty nice fold. We'll thank the pandemic for being able to build some more of this a little faster and a little harder. It allowed us to kind of focus a little bit more on that. But I think we are now pretty much as a community, everyone believes terpenes are important. So now it's which ones when. And where are the terpenes found? They're found in the trichomes. They're produced alongside of the cannabinoids. And the plant most likely is using them to communicate with its environment to bring in, you know, things that may help ward off something that's bothering the plant. So it can be its own type of pesticide in a way. It can get rid of certain, bugs that are bothering it. It can communicate to other plants out there to say, hey, I'm here. So please don't take all of my resources. From the plant's perspective, it's a pretty poor, defenseless little thing that's not allowed to move, right? It's kind of stuck in its spot in the ground. So it's got to come up with ways of, defending itself and communicating, and it does that through molecules. So in a way, we're trying to translate on a molecular sense what are these, plants trying to tell us. And we're starting to get some clues. Maybe it's at least telling us these things are here. It's here and it can help you. How do we start to harness that and utilize that in the best way? Some folks ask me, are terpenes psychoactive? And I would say that the definition of the word psychoactive can be a delicate and dangerous one. Does it change your mood? Is it mood altering? Does it change, effects in your brain? Can they have those types of effects? Certainly can, right? Do all of them do that? Maybe not. I think we should really use caution, especially in cannabis, as I hope I've highlighted already. If I overgeneralize and say this does this or all things do that, it's probably wrong if I say all, right? Many, a lot, some, some may not. Those types of things kind of at least impart in your brain that, hey, not everything is going to do that. So there's very specific combinations. There's very specific molecules and molecular interactions. So when someone says, are terpenes psychoactive? Some may be, some may not be, right? So there is the potential for that. And there's certainly the potential to potentiate that effect of THC or other cannabinoids. So when they're present in the product, we do feel the cannabinoids a little bit more. And that was, what Raz's work had really highlighted for us. So we now have some better understanding that that is actually scientifically valid. And again, most of us have, felt that effect ourselves too. So I thought it'd be interesting to highlight just a couple terpenes that we find most often and more common to cannabis. And terpenes are found in plants in general. So the word terpene to a chemist means about 20,000 plus molecules on the planet, right? So they are from the very simple up to the super complex like Taxol. They mean, I'm just built with these types of carbon skeletons, and they can be derivatized, functionalized, all sorts of other things can happen to them in a chemical sense. But they're present in things that you may very well be aware of. Linalool being present in lavender, a lot of folks know lavender. We smell limonene because it's 95+% of the essential oil of citrus fruits. So we're kind of, aware of those types of things. The beer drinkers around here are familiar with, hops and humulene, chamomile for bisabolol, and beta caryophyllene is pretty prevalent in black pepper. And different folks will like different ones, and some of those have scent memory, right? You're like, oh, this reminds me of that time I put too much pepper on my salad and it was a horrific event. We probably all have different responses or different memories that are elucidated when we are, smelling some of these types of things. Some of the other ones that are common, terpinolene. So these are a little bit more common in what we'll say are considered, the word sativa, the uplifting, energetic, or the ones that go in that direction. Myrcene is present in mangoes, but I'll caution you, there are over 4,000 different types of mangoes, and not all of them are high in myrcene. So, some folks are like, hey, I took this mango and I didn't see this effect being, potentiated. Well, did you test and verify that your mango actually had an appreciable amount of myrcene in it? It may not have, right? So I don't think we get that many, right? There's definitely not 4,000 different ones in the grocery store, but there are some different ones, right? Some are definitely different pungent, for me. Some are definitely different in taste. So there's something going on there. And, it's related to terpenes and other molecules. They're definitely not all the same. So if you tried the mango thing and you didn't feel anything, it may not be because of you. It might be you had the wrong mango. And I don't, we don't commercially test for those types of things inside of the grocery store. This slide is just kind of like, here's some of the other ones. And this is why you start to see why we use 3-letter codes or simple names, because some of these things are not that easy to discuss. The numbers after them are more of the way that we concretely say it is exactly this molecule. It's the chemical abstracts services. They give a registration number to it. So when a molecule is identified, if it's new and finally, it wasn't known, it's now known now. it will get a registration number, and we'll be able to say it is exactly that molecule. So if you get very specific, you want to start to talk with CAS numbers. It's just a way of making sure you are talking about the exact right molecule as opposed to not. But there are numbers for mixtures of molecules, essential oils, and other things also get those registration numbers too. So I thought another interesting question to ask might be, what is your favorite terpene? That, and I listed more here than I had before. And if everyone would take just a moment to try and answer this one and say, which one they thought was at least, the popular one for them. Um, and you may not know, right? I think I'm fortunate enough that I've had the individual ones, I've got complex ones, I know which plants might have more than the others. You might say, well, I don't know what to guess, but I'll just guess based on I like, black pepper, or I've seen these things on the labels. California's regulated system does not require terpene testing. Nevada does. So that's an interesting state. I know Connecticut does. So folks in those locations, have the benefit of that information is supposed to be available to them. There's probably more content on the labels. Only if you're making claims inside of California about the terpenes and their effects are you required to test for them. It's a little bit of a interesting regulatory piece. But I think it's kind of led towards most folks don't voluntarily test and they don't want to add cost to the testing. So we're not seeing perhaps a large amount of, terpene information in California like some of the other states are.
I'm hoping that in the future, though, we do move towards a market where more terpenes are listed on our cannabis flower products.
I think so. I mean, I think that should be the natural evolution of things. It will be a way to differentiate your products, right? And I think as
Mhm.
folks listen to webinars like this, as they educate themselves better and they start to demand and ask, I want to see those products. Someone's going to go take out there and say, look, here is my terpene profile, and with that, we'll start to see others say like, well, that one's being selected because folks are seeing that information and choosing it. I better go do the same thing too.
Yep.
It's not an expensive test when you have 50 pounds of material. So, it's less than $100. So it really doesn't add much cost. And I think it does add tremendous value. So we should eventually start to see that. I don't think we're far from seeing that actually show up. Um, so here, I think the winner today, at least, is limonene. The almost 50% of the folks like limonene. Big fan of the citrus. I can appreciate that too. And beta caryophyllene came in second place. So there's a lot of black pepper fans. I am one of those as well. So I try not to say which one is, my favorite. I like a number of them. It's kind of like saying they're children. You can't pick a favorite one. They're important. So they all seem to have their importance and utilities. But certainly I think everybody has their own physiological preference for which ones they may prefer over others. Um, so the other piece that I wanted to kind of hit on today was the hemp cannabinoids, right? And forgive me, I'm going to put up my fun pictures here of the molecules, and a little bit of history to start it with. THC had previously had an old numbering system, so you may see some references to these numbers, and I wanted to provide that here so folks could be clear. So it was originally delta 1. And you see the double bond between 1 and 2 up in the top left corner. But today, we all call it Delta 9. Where does Delta 9 come from? They redefined the core structure and how to number around the ring system. So this is the current numbering system that we're all going on. So the way we refer to it, Delta 9, it's going between, you see 9 and 10 there. The lower number gets the first indication and it starts with that one. So when we say Delta 8, you'll see that it will go between 8 and 9. So that's, kind of the convention in those things. And, we're going to start to see that everywhere around this structure, folks have started to try and derivatize it or modify it. So we're seeing that, second line, I can actually, I'll try to use the drawing tool. So, right here, we see this double bond. It's starting to go all the way around the ring, right? So we're starting to see it play in those types of places. Folks are putting things on what we call acetates. It's on the phenolic OH, the hydroxyl group here, this one. They're starting to modify that. and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then how do we see different lengths of, carbons here? So we've got, 5 carbons for THC. The varins are 3, but we know that there are other ones of different lengths. So if you start to stretch that out, that's when you start to get to THCP, and I'll talk about that. So first, the ring isomers. We're just going to walk around and you see delta 8, delta 10, and 10 would be between 10 and 10A, delta 7, 11. Then they were saying also 3 and 4. So I've seen those show up, which uses the old numbering system. So pretty much every version that you could think, that every one of these carbons gets the 2 lines, the double bond in some fashion, and there's even some that are completely without it, like HHC, or where it's completely aromatized, like CBN. So we've done, pretty much all the types of simple chemistry that you could do around the ring system on the top left hand there. The ones that you look at when you start to move the double bond, so delta 8 is different than delta 9. And how is delta 8 different? Well, delta 8 can be looked at more of like a kind of like a hybrid between THC and CBD. So it has lower activity at CB1, a little bit more improved activity at CB2. And I didn't do this, but the reasons for that are these things are flexible in space. And when I start to move that, the little line that we draw here for us around, the molecule starts to like shape in different ways. So these things like to twist or not twist. CBD can twist because it is not locked in that third ring system with the O on the bottom. And because of that, it can interact with all these different types of structures. Or receptors, when I start to lock it up, it has less degrees of freedom. So, when I start to put that line in different places, it may push that piece down instead of up. And that then changes its affinity or its, type of binding strength for CB1 or CB2. So each one of those will have their own type of activity. They're different types of, physiological effects. Some folks like delta 8 for that blended effect. It's a little bit less in psychoactivity potential, so it can be a little bit more friendly or favorable if you're going to, see that as potentially the first step into cannabis. It may be, a little bit more forgiving of not causing, too much psychoactivity for someone. There are a lot of high potency products out here with large amounts of THC, delta 9 THC. Delta 8 may offer like a little bit easier, step for some folks in that respect. But each of them are different. And I think when you start to take them away completely, you'll see the little asterisks up here on the HHC molecule right up here. And what that denotes is there's right hands and left hands. So these are stereoisomers. So the classical story for organic chemists with stereoisomers is the one of thalidomide. So one hand caused, excellent effects for mitigating morning sickness for pregnant women. The other handed molecule caused horrific birth defects, actually formed flippers for the children, unfortunately. So their limbs did not develop fully. So we learned the hard way from that one that the FDA or the regulatory bodies for new molecular entities has to understand right hand and left handedness, and that these will interact differently with the body. So the technical term in chemistry is chirality. Stereoisomers, are these particular enantiomers or diastereomers. It can get very technical too. But just think of it like right hand and left hand. And the definition of the hands they are non-superimposable mirror images, right? My thumbs are now on either side. So if I put a mirror between these, I can see both of my hands the same, but I cannot stick them the same way. So if the thumb is very important to going into the receptor, but it's on the wrong side, it's not going to bind to that receptor the same way. So HHC will have one kind of go down and one that will go up in this thing, and it will have different activity for each of those as well. So someone says, hey, I took delta 9 and I made HHC. Well, you made 2 molecules, not just one, and each of those has their own activity. So unless they're saying that they have separated that out of the mixture and they've got both of them, which I am not aware that anyone is doing yet today. It is technically possible, of course, but probably not at commercial scale. Not today. Anyway, it'd take a lot of work to get there. You start to think like, I don't know, What's up with that one? What are both of those doing? My concern with that molecule specifically is what are the metabolites? So the double bond that's here, you've heard of 11 hydroxy THC.
Hmm.
You've got stuff that comes off there, and then the carboxy version. The body does this metabolism to it so it can clear it and excrete it. So how do I make it more water soluble? How do I get it into the waste stream so that I can go and fail my urinalysis test, unfortunately, right? So how do I get it out of the body? It uses what we call the allylic position. So you need the double bond, and the next one to it is what the body says, hey, I can oxidize that easily. I can take these types of things and get rid of them. We have eliminated that ability when we make HHC. So that one gives me, at least from like a medicinal chemistry or kind of pharmaceutical perspective, I don't know if that one would be as favorable when I draw it out. Yes, I can make it, but I don't know if it's going to cause the same physiological activity, or if I might have a metabolic problem where it's starting to build up and become toxic in the body because it's not cleared at the same rate. Um, CBN, that one is a little different. When it's all the double bonds there, you see the 3 in the ring, it's flat. So those things are flat and planar. They may stack differently into receptors. CBN has been shown back in like the mid 70s that it had very different activity. It's 1/100th the potency at CB1 receptor as delta 9 THC. So it's got lower activity. We don't know which other receptors along the endocannabinoid system it may be interacting with, what else it might be kind of helping to cause some of the preferable effects that some are touting it to be. Some folks over in Israel are saying they do not believe that this is the molecule responsible for sleep. Some folks here swear that it absolutely is.
Yeah, it's
um,
interesting because the research can't really prove what anecdotally we're seeing, people saying and what the products are being manufactured, for sleep. Yeah, so it'd
exactly.
be interesting.
Marketing wise, we were telling
Yeah,
everybody it's great for sleep.
yeah,
Scientifically proven, different story, right?
yeah, yeah.
So
Very interesting.
it's possible that that's in there and it's not having the effect, but the other molecules that are present in that specific mixture or formulation are helpful towards generating a sleep effect. So is it one? I don't think you can blame one for any of the effects, but if it's there together with 3 or 5 other things, maybe then we are seeing that effect. So if I've started to try and tease out like one molecule and I say this one molecule does that, okay, that molecule by itself did do that. But when that molecule is with 10 other things or 100 other things, it may not have the ability to do that, or others are beating it to the pathway and causing different effects because their
Mhm.
affinities are stronger. So again, it's much more complex. CBN, I think it doesn't suffer the same metabolic problems as HHC. There are definitely synthetic routes to get there, but which ones may be chosen and which impurities might be present is a little bit more of the concern with that one. And I'll talk a little bit more about impurities for some of these as well. Because if you're going to formulate with these and you want to try and get, entourage effects dialed in, you do have to pay attention to the purity of the molecules and what you're doing with them. Um, Acetates are some of the other ones that we're seeing out there. So I think what everybody's going to unfortunately be able to relate to is if I take, morphine, I can make it heroin by converting the same types of OH groups to acetates. So things pass the blood-brain barrier in much more rapid and easy fashion when I take the polar hydroxyl group and cap it with an acetic group and make it an acetate. So delta 9 THC acetate was kind of touted like, hey, it's going to go be a little bit more potent than just delta 9 THC itself. It's going to be stronger because it's going to go through the blood brain barrier better. I don't know if anyone's quantified that or actually looked at that in a real scientific sense. My concern with this is use as a vape product. So phenolic acetates, that's the same thing that was present in vitamin E acetate. And there
Mhm.
has been studies that have shown if I take a phenolic acetate and I superheat it, I can have it break down to form this molecule known as ketene, which is hyperreactive and caused all the lung lesions and problems that caused EVALI. So it's a major culprit. It might not have been the only culprit in that, but it is definitely very well proven and pretty clear, at least in the research lab, that that can be problematic if you are going to inhale it. So if anyone's using delta 9 or delta 8 acetates for vape products or in a dab or in oils for inhalation, I would stress significant caution with that. You can have a lot of other problems that show up from that. It's not quite necessary. I don't think, like, oral products, that's maybe more questionable. I think, okay, if I'm just going to orally consume it, is that an improvement? But you're starting to venture into, a realm that these are new molecular entities. These are not things that we have seen around in the supply chain or the stream for a while. You should know that you're kind of the human guinea pig and you're kind of running these experiments on yourselves. What else is with these? What else is going along? How are they manufactured? All sorts of things that are very important. Um, and that kind of brings me up to like these aliphatic variants. How might I start to change things on the tail of the carbon chain? THCP has certainly risen in popularity because what we've discovered, pharmaceutical companies looked at these things a long time ago, right? So they've made all sorts of molecules, tens of thousands of these, and said, hey, if I tinker with delta 8 in this effect, or this fashion, if I start to elongate the aliphatic chain, I start to see the activity increase at CB1. It doesn't mean that that's all that I wanted for my physiological or medicinal effects. Again, too strong at the same receptor might be problematic because the system locks up. But now that we've kind of understood, hey, if I make this longer, will I start to say, get improving my psychoactivity effect is I think what a lot of the folks are marketing, unfortunately. So THCP it's out there. It has 7 carbons instead of 5 on the aliphatic chain, and it is purported to be 33 times stronger at CB1 than delta 9 THC by itself. So they've done some receptor studies, but again, that's on that one receptor. So how different is it? Is it actually going to feel stronger? What else is with it? Is it worth taking something like that? Um, they're saying it's hemp and hemp derived. I don't believe that's the case. I have personally met some folks that were synthetically producing these things, which it's definitely doable and possible from a synthetic chemistry standpoint, but that wouldn't be compliant under the Farm Bill, and it would, is again a new molecular entity, and it may have synthetically derived, connotations that go with that. At the right purity, it could probably be fine, but we don't know enough about these things yet to say should these be in our supply chain. And purity is definitely what matters, right? So in 2018, we got this one from Oregon's supply chain, where you can kind of see there's delta 8 that's in here, and then there's some delta 9, but the orange trace there from the HPLC shows you there's a couple other cannabinoid looking like thingies, right? In this region they would be cannabinoid like. They were unknown. What's the purity of this? If memory serves me correct, I thought it was around 60-70% of delta 8 is what they were saying. What's the rest of this stuff? You'll see CBN in the very front on the left hand side. I'll caution that looks like it's more than it is because of the technical way that the HPLC works. With the UV light, it absorbs UV light a lot stronger than the other ones. So its relative response in this type of test is greater. So I don't have 5 molecules of CBN and 10 of delta 9. It's more like there's like 1 molecule of CBN and 100 of delta 9, and the peaks look like this. So even though it looks like it's significant, it's actually not a significantly large amount of CBN there. But the point is, there are impurities, right? There are other things there might be unknown ones. We're trying to stress to the regulators, some of these things are not necessary. We don't really know enough about them. They may cause harm. We probably shouldn't put them out there. This is just a proposal. We have no idea how these things are going to be regulated. There's supposedly going to be a new farm bill at the end of this year. We'll see if that actually happens or not. California is in discussions about how to regulate hemp and hemp-derived cannabinoids. Many other states are, and some states have said none except for CBN. Maybe others, if we know the process, know the purity, you can prove that you can reproducibly do that time and time again, which is what the FDA does for a lot of our pharmaceutical products, or all of them, right? It says, hey, I watched your chemistry and manufacturing, I watched your control systems, I know your analytical method, and you've proven time and time and time again you consistently make the exact same thing within these specifications. Each of the states may have to do that for cannabis if this is not federally legal and the FDA steps in and does that. It is what the FDA does. They have all the folks, skilled and ready to do that. But today we don't have that, right? So states are starting to say, well, what should I do? Some of these are out there, right? We've got CBD, CBDV. We want some of these things to be able to explore them. We're pretty comfortable with they've been around, or to some extent. When we start to raise their concentration, it's definitely different. But there are others that we know are being derivatized or manufactured in different ways, right? Derived from CBD or from some other starting material. And if there's a process where there's those types of transformations, we should probably pay pretty good attention to the manufacturing methods and the potential impurities that are there. There are ways to clean them all up. There are ways to do this elegantly, very efficiently, at commercial scales. So all of it is technically doable, and I think it's just going to take good regulators to say we're going to require that, we're going to monitor it, and then we're going to go say this one is approved, and you can reintroduce, delta 8 THC or other cannabinoids into the supply chain. It is a very hot topic for debate in the legislature, the assembly, and everyone up here is talking about it. Regulators are actively talking about it. It's a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was curious in this question, who's noticed different effects from different products, even if they're from the same cultivar or cultivator. Are you actually feeling the entourage effect, and are you feeling that even subtle differences, what we may say looks like a little bit on a certificate of analysis, or one terpene was above another one, they can sometimes cause wildly different physiological effects and physiological responses. um, so the poll question here is, have you felt that difference? How many people have actually noticed that one? This is probably a softball for most folks. And like I did expect, so far everyone has said, yes, I have felt that difference, right? So again, it lends towards, I can find the right one for me, but I really have to pay attention to the details to find that right one, because subtle differences may not be exactly the right one, or not the one that I am looking for. So there's probably something for everyone in some respects, or at least to some, small context. But which one is right for me is still a much more, complex question in that one. So in that regard, I wanted to highlight, people will name, or even brands will name, like the products, like, hey, this came from Blue Dream. So I have Blue Dream flower and I have Blue Dream concentrate. Well, this picture hopefully shows pictorially in the nice colors. Just because I use the same name, it is not the same terpene profile. So it is not the same composition, whether I called it, Durban Poison, Black Blue Dream, pick the flavor of the week. This data was from Nevada. So a nice lab in Nevada shared this data with us and said, look, we see the same product name in flower, in, live resins, and we're seeing that their compositions are different. So, our approach technically is to look at these compositions when they're on the plant and replicate them from individual ingredients. How can I make this standardized, consistent, so that every single time I'm getting the exact same chemical composition, which should drive the exact same effects and physiological output? So, source, again, where am I getting these things? Are they cannabis derived terpenes, botanical source terpenes? A terpene's a terpene at the right purity. It's a molecule is a molecule. I just have to know what else was with it, not necessarily where did it come from, as much as what's its purity and then how am I going to use it. So these things are doable. We do it all the time. We create formulations like that are infinitely scalable, consistent from batch to batch, and reproducible every single time. I think, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Not only do we have all these molecules, so we've got hundreds of molecules with almost infinite combinations. Now we have many different types of modes of ingestion, right? So I'm not absorbing the same things into the bloodstream if I inhale the product versus sublingually take it versus orally consume it or apply it topically. So we have a lot of different means, and they're put in a lot of different formulations, because not even all the edibles are the same, even if they all say 10 milligrams of THC or 5 milligrams. What else is going with it, from the chocolate bar to the gummy to the way the gummy was made? Not even all gummies are the same, right? Some are absorbed better or worse than others. It's a very, very, unfortunately, complex picture. Ask your brand how they're making things. Think about your formulations if you're going to create them yourselves, and feel free to ask as many questions of the manufacturers. What's on the ingredient list? What's going into this one? Why might these things be different? Most of the clues are actually on the labels, and you can, most of the manufacturers, or just certainly dispensary operators, are very open to have the conversations, in my experience at least. You can start to figure out what's the right one for you. And some people have a preference for mode of ingestion. So we would never want to stifle, hey, we should only have things this way. We may come to find out that the best way to deliver, for XYZ certain indications would be vaporization or inhalation, or, only orally consumable products are the ones that seem to be working this way. We don't have that yet today. So I think if there's a personal preference that you want to try or that you've liked, you probably can find a product that may be helpful for you. But try and start, thinking of it like a funnel. I'm going to start in the extreme edges. I'm going to work my way down. So, hey, bud tender, tell me what's very, very different about this. Or if I'm going to launch a brand and formulate products, I might come up with compositions that are wildly different from each one, so that I can offer something for a broader number of folks. As long as I can do that consistently, I will start to figure out which one's the right ones and which products these people are gravitating towards. And I think the plant tells us a lot, right? The plant's profile, that's the guide. So if I stick to these things, Raz and his efforts have said those were more effective in kind of perturbing the endocannabinoid system than otherwise. So we don't have to go reinvent the wheel. Let the plants be the guide. Some folks will definitely not want to combust and consume plant material. It can be difficult to the tongue if you're going to just try and eat it directly too. So there is a place for formulated products. We can go manufacture these things in consistent means. But modeling it after the plant is probably the best possible way to go with that one. And if you're manufacturing your products, the key piece has to be consistency. Standardize my product, make it consistently batch to batch, and then go out there in the marketplace and listen to what it's telling you to see what might be the right things for you. And I'll kind of end with this question, which is mostly for me. Was this webinar useful to you? Was it helpful? Did everybody find the information useful in some manner? And I'm happy to open it up to the Q&A and see if we can't take a few questions too.
And I would personally say 100%. I found it very interesting. You always are a great source of knowledge. I always appreciate you coming on. And I mean, doing this 20 years, and you always make me feel like there's so much more to learn and to know, and that, we're always discovering new things about cannabis and what we thought we know. We have just so much more to learn. So this has been so informative, and let's see what our respondents said here, and they agree with me 100%.
Good. That's good.
100% people have thought this was very educational. So can you tell me, in California anyways, does the California regulated market, do they allow hemp derived terpene or hemp derived cannabinoids into the California market?
No, not yet. They do not allow them yet. So that's part of the question. How do we integrate these things? How do we put them together or not? Do we put them all in the same supply chain through dispensaries, or do we put them, let the hemp derived ones go out into, gas stations, 7-Elevens, grocery stores, convenience stores, and everything else? Or do they go down the regulated dispensary chain? We have a testing system that's set up through the regulated dispensary system. We have, informed, educated folks operating those places. I kind of lean towards it be nice to have them in this like cannabis centralized location where everyone knows it could be those. There may be ones that are psychoactive and not, but I can kind of get some cannabis expert knowledge as opposed to this is what the gas station guy told me. We're not at that place where there's such a plethora of knowledge that everyone knows what these things are like, and they can easily pick this up because they're familiar with it. But it's not decided yet, and we don't know what may happen. We hope to know this legislative session, but I'm pretty sure something's going to happen. We just don't know exactly what that is yet.
Yeah. And there was probably, I would say, a good year or more where we did have some products with Delta 8 in them where it kind of was flying under the radar. And it was nice for patients, that had, high pain or whatever, and they were able to get edibles that were, 100 milligrams plus Delta 8 that were able to, give them higher levels of relief, stronger affecting products they felt, and that was nice. And then unfortunately they took those off the market. So I personally would like to see, some of those products back on the market. Perhaps there could be some sort of different label or something on the label to let people know that there was, hemp derived, cannabinoids inside that product, to make it a little bit easier when bud tenders are working with those patients to let them know that this product does have like a hemp derived cannabinoid in it, because I do see that being like the challenge maybe of being able to like educate them on like what's in there. But yeah,
For
that's really
sure.
great.
Yep.
um so a question that one of the audience members had, so you talked about all of the new cannabinoids, synthetic cannabinoids and hemp derived cannabinoids that are being released into the market, like in a lot of the head shops, smoke shops, like across the country, really. Do you think that was a response to the federal legalization, the prohibition of cannabis, like in a lot of the states that don't have cannabis dispensaries?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it proliferated because folks were looking for some of that activity for one reason or another. And if there's not a legal system in my state and it's not explicitly illegal, then I'm going to try and proceed. There are definitely a lot of pioneers or folks willing to push some of those limits and get out there. And I think it has proliferated because of that. It also was we had a lot of CBD that was cultivated, and it started to pile up. And everyone's like, "Well, what else might I be able to do with this material? Can I convert it to something else that may be in more demand than what I overgrew here for a little bit?" So as the as the entire farming and cannabis supply chain system reaches equilibrium, we may see that that's we'll have different amounts of different cultivars are produced at certain levels. We won't overdo it, but getting out of the gate, everyone's anticipating infinite demand. It's never that. We didn't know how much we may or may not need or what the actual market size was, so there's a whole bunch of market dynamics kind of leading to some of those things too, I think.
Yeah, no, I would agree. That's a good answer to that. I would definitely agree. We did have like a surplus at one time. I mean, I know many people that all of a sudden had these big hemp businesses because we had so much,
Right.
hemp flower, and some of the quality was so nice. It, looked similar to the cannabis flower smelt,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
it was,
Breeding has gone along those lines too, right? We've got things that
yeah,
you wouldn't know by looks, right? Which one
you,
was which, but this
you,
one's high in CBD and this one's high in THC.
yeah, you could hardly
Um,
tell the difference. It
and you
was
couldn't
pretty,
tell by nose anymore either. So,
yeah, it's
yep.
really interesting. So we have another person that's new, that is an organic grower, that's making products for a community of their friends that's using it medicinally, and they have some questions. And some other people that might be watching, joining from the internet, maybe that are just kind of new to cannabis, and she had asked some question that is kind of a good basic one. But can you answer, or can you let some new viewers know what is a full spectrum product?
Sure. I think, those terms aren't really well defined and generally accepted, but I think it's trying to say I've got more of what the plant produces in this type of product. It's not an isolate, it's not a single molecule. There are a couple of different, ways to get there, but this has more of what the plant originally produced or derivatives of that I've captured in some manufacturing process than a single molecule isolate. So, I've got hopefully more of the entourage opportunity by offering you this quote unquote full spectrum or broad spectrum types of products. So some folks are trying to differentiate them by saying this has THC or not THC. There's kind of legal farm bill compliance types of pieces with that. But I think that's the general idea, is that a full spectrum product is going to have much more of the plant's molecules present and not just a single molecule isolate.
And then a home grower, what's the best way that they can get their terpene profile tested?
It's tricky. It depends on where you live, and I think the individual that asked this is not here in the States, so I'm not familiar with the testing system there. But labs in California are able to take samples from others. Like any individual can walk it into a lab and say, "I'd like to have this profiled. I'd like to have this tested," and the lab can give you the information that way. So, short of analytical testing, you can't really know. You certainly couldn't quantify. Some folks are very good at picking out certain ones. We offer an olfactory kit that you can buy on our website that might start to help you train yourself to saying, I'm noticing more of terpinolene or beta caryophyllene in this one. It's got to be that this is more prevalent than this other comparable, but only, if you took it to a testing lab, could you actually quantify that?
I was going to
Unfortunately.
say that. I was going to say,
Yeah.
could you use your nose? But you may not be able to quantify it, but you could start to train your nose and
Yep.
kind of pick up hints, and and then you could kind of try
And
to,
some are more distinct than others. Like some are like, that is not Jacaré. Like I know
yeah,
that because that one's very prevalent in terpenylene. It's pretty obvious that that's different than a lot of the other ones. So some folks would say, I know it's not that, or it is that, because of that. And some folks have a great nose, and tons of experience certainly makes that better too.
yeah, which is pretty cool party trick too, though I may add. So
Yeah, it is.
pretty
Yeah,
cool to
yeah.
pick up one of those kits that you make and you have on your website, and do a blind test at a party, and
Play a
really
game.
impress
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, for sure.
So what kind of equipment is used to manipulate these cannabinoids and do all this cool manipulation that you talk about?
For testing, it's mostly like chromatography. For the terpenes, it is HPLC for the cannabinoids. So you want to see cannabinoid acids and the neutral cannabinoids. You use HPLC because that's all done at room temperature. But gas chromatography is good for the light volatiles, things like the terpenes and stuff like that. It's perfect for that. What equipment do they use to do extractions to get these things out? There's carbon dioxide, CO2 extractors, ethanol extractors, hydrocarbon extractors, water hash, bubble hash, or even rosin pressing, right? So
Okay,
there
so
are
like
mechanical
regular
presses.
manufacturing equipment that they
Yep.
would use to make the
Yep.
products. Okay, I
Correct.
just didn't know if it was like specialized equipment, kind of stuff that you use at a lab, but just like traditional kind of like production, like
These are
manufacturing.
all used in all the botanical world. It's not that they've made special equipment. I mean, save the rosin press; those things may be a little bit more specialized for cannabis, but they're presses and oil presses. You get cold pressed oil, frequently, right? So it's been present in the botanical and food world for quite a while.
Yeah, pretty cool. Another person asked a question. She's saying in the commercial cannabis, I would think she's talking about like in the cannabis dispensaries. She's saying, is there any CBD in the cannabis, or are they not just testing for it? And what I think she's saying is like when you see the testing on the cannabis, like in California, it might say like 30% or 28% THC and like less than 0% CBD.
So there
What
are, yeah,
talk?
there are testing limits, right? So that the lab can say, I can't quantify that because there's not enough, but I know there's some of it there, right? Or I didn't detect it. Non-detectable means it was below this number I can quantify at, and I didn't see it, right? I can say, here's my limit of detection and my limit of quantification. Quantification is always greater than detection because I lose accuracy at very, very small amounts. So if I'm reporting the number, it's above my limit of quantification, and I can say, here's the actual number. If I say it's, less than that, less than the LOQ, I probably detected it, but I can tell you it's not zero, but I don't know exactly how much is there. It's just a very small amount.
Yeah.
Most of it is like it's all THC, THCA, and trace tiny little itty bitty, blips of CBDA or CBD that are in there. So it's kind of been like bred to the point where that pathway is overwhelmed in the plant. It's just all going down that, and every now and then, we'll get a little bit of CBD that comes around. So you'll see the labels. It's mostly THC with very, very minor traces, if any, of CBD that are there. But there's testing limitations that cause somewhat of the confusion on there.
Yeah. So it's in there. It's just very little to the point where it's not really quantifying.
Yeah.
And last
That
question.
doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect. It means we didn't quantify it,
Yeah.
right? So that's the challenge.
Yeah. And kind of related, and I think this is what the other question was trying to say, but I remember probably like, like we're saying, like we've seen it, back like 10 years ago, we used to think like 25 to high 20s was like the limit of like THC, and like now we're seeing like high 30s, which is like very interesting. So what do you think of like that phenomenon? And what do you think like the limit of like what we're actually
Yep.
going to see is?
I I think the breeding did not get that much better. I did not think that we like magically made super plants, in the short term of 2 years, to say that all of a sudden I went from 15% THC to 30 plus. Um, we do know there are ways to use the plus minus tolerance within the lab and the methods used within that if you stack all of those together, you can start to push what's, really accurately and reproducibly and correctly a 20% up to 30 or more. So unfortunately, seeing this rise, we're going to have the labs corrected in the hopefully not too distant future. There is legislation that says there's now a state lab. There are going to be methods that you have to at least perform that are comparable to state things. The tolerance window is going to get really tight, and we're going to be able to say, this is really 22 or 24% THC, and it is no longer 35 or
Yeah.
36 or whatever this lab got paid to give me. We know lab shopping goes around. It is horrific. It is wrong to the consumer. I think there are infused flowers that certainly those numbers are different, but that wasn't produced by the plant. So there's, ways that those products may actually exist and be accurate and valid in their number, but there's, probably not some just natural breed. I think like 30% is probably going to be the upper limit, within a very small margin of that. We saw it once, like when we did do a lot of the testing, and that cultivator couldn't produce it again. It never came back in. And we tested that thing, like 10 times over to be sure. You're like, wow, that one, it really is 30. But they can kind of cut the top of the plant, right? Like you can harvest a certain part and say, that's
Selectively
my
choose the
batch.
buds.
So the whole plant, if I chewed up the whole thing, you see those DEA numbers, right? It ground up the whole plant and everything's 4%. It's slowly risen up to, 8, 9, 10. All right, well, that's the whole plant, right? If I'm plucking off the certain flowered parts or just this piece, and I'm only testing that, well, if this batch is kind of cherry picked for that, the number might be a little higher too, but that's not what the whole plant produced by itself in the entire range of the plant. Tops of
Yeah.
the plants might be better than the lower parts of the plants due to where the lights are interacting.
Yeah,
So
and
there's
that's
a
also they
whole,
test. They
yeah,
pick from like different parts. Yeah.
right. So is it, harvested in a certain way? Is it randomized when it was picked for the sampling? And did the lab stack some of the errors inside the lab to make it different? It can be a very different game that starts to raise those numbers. So, so some folks were like, here's my sample and I need it to be over 25% or I can't sell it. I'm like, I don't think you know how the lab works. Like we tell you what the number is. You're not going to tell me what the number is. And part of the reason we don't commercially do the compliance testing anymore, it's you're not rewarded for accuracy. You tell them they're holding the bag with pesticides or mold. You tell them the real THC number was 18%, and you never see your clients again. It's really unfortunate. I think there will be a correction. We'll probably see it like happen, and then overnight we'll see all the label values drop, and everyone's going to scratch their head and say, "Wait a minute!" And we're all going to realize they were not telling us the right numbers before, and these are more accurately in line. The benefit is if you think there's more, like if you think it's 30%, but it's really 15, you're probably not going to overdo it. Like if it was the other way, hey, there's actually 15 when I told you it was 5, that's super dangerous, right? So, it isn't going that way. It could. If someone sets a potency cap limit, we'll see that happen, right? So all of a sudden everyone's below that and they don't get taxed as much, but the products seem to be more potent than what I'm being labeled. So, we just want accuracy. Alcohol can get the second decimal place of how much alcohol is inside the product. It's accurate to that number. Analytical abilities do exist. There's a little variability with botanical products and plant matrices in general, but we can certainly tighten up the windows and make that, much, much better. There's legislation about testing, but it will probably be visited again next year. It's a 2-year bill. We won't see that change coming this year, unfortunately. So we're going to have to wait a little while, but I do think it'll eventually correct itself, at least in California, and hopefully other states will follow along that too.
Yeah. Leveling of the playing field, will be nice.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
But I like, what you guys are doing. I like, how you are, educating consumers, to make them better informed and working with the companies to help them, manufacture and create better products. So I appreciate you and what you guys do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting together this wonderful presentation and spending this time with us. How can people get a hold of you if they want to work with you, or if they want to, visit your website and maybe get some more information, or like I said, if they want
Sure.
like a team kit or
Yep.
anything like that?
Yep. My email address is at the front of the slides, jeff@thewerkshop.com, THEWERCSHOP. There's a form on our website. You can follow me at Dr. Jeff Raber on Instagram, and I have a LinkedIn profile. All of those will eventually get you there. The workshop, that's our main website. Or you can find me directly. And we're certainly happy to help anyone formulate products, produce those things for them, hook up the network in some way to make sure they're getting what they would require on a consistent, standardized basis. And just hope to keep being able to do this for everyone. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Definitely appreciate the platform.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll have you back again. You're one of my favorite guests, and thank you so much. And like I said, 12 years. I remember when I did the Know Your Rights Expo at the Anaheim Convention Center. 12
That's
years
right.
ago, you were one of our first vendors. And you and your brother, does your brother still work with you? Or
Yes, he does. Yeah.
that's cool. Mark, right?
Correct.
Tell
Yeah.
Mark I say hi.
Will do. I will do.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Raber.
Thank you, Candace. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah.
Thank you
Tell the
again.
whole team at the workshop we say hello and thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you to all of our viewers today. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's webinar. We hope that we were able to share some information that will help you become better informed cannabis consumers, and that the information that we shared will help you find relief. Everyone stay well, stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you for the next episode.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.